really everybody in the content business and the digital business is having trouble defining the word content. So can I just say that I hate the word content? And it almost feels like filler. Like I made a pie and I filled it with blueberries. And so I'm hoping that if anything else, this panel comes up with a new definition. And just in case there isn't time to ask questions here, please tweet your ideas to hashtag radical content. And so let me start by introducing my panelists. And starting to my left, let me get everyone's bios here. It's Sarah Chubb, who is one of the pioneers in digital content and was responsible for some of the boldest moves that Condé Nast made, including for the first time getting these brands online, but also, importantly, was the acquirer of Reddit. And today at Gilt City, she's creating content that is really part of that company's sales and its offering to consumers. So Fran Hauser has built some of the strongest brands for entertainment and style through her role as president of digital for Time Inc. And she reaches about 38 million people each month, so I think all of us could recognize her work. Larry Kramer has been one of the leaders in digital for many years. First of all, through founding MarketWatch, and a site that really changed how everybody perceived the business world. And less than 6 months ago, he became the publisher of USA Today and is really transforming that brand. And Jonah Peretti understands the power of the social web and user interaction to fuel the growth of content, first by being one of the co-founders of the Huffington Post, and now as CEO of BuzzFeed, which has created communities of millions of passionate users. And then finally, John Robinson oversees the creative strategies for P&G's brands and some of the most significant brands of the world as part of Digitas. And he's applying a newsroom model to campaigns he's creating using new platforms and social media. And one of the things that we'll need to talk about with John is really the line between what's content that's created by media companies and content that's created by advertisers and brands themselves. So I'd like to start with Jonah. And Jonah, how are the evolving modes of content discovery, like social sharing, how are they influencing the way that content gets created, and how does it get assimilated throughout the world?
Sure. When we started Huffington Post, it wasn't really possible to make a big site through sharing. Facebook and Twitter were either didn't exist or weren't mature yet. And so search was really where where traffic came from for big publishers on the web. And as a result, in the search era, people would make content that was very heavy on keywords, that had nouns front-loaded in the front of headlines, and that were it was more a world of noun-based content. And now what you see with social is more a world of verb-based content and content that has a more emotional appeal to it, where there's a reason to share it. You make content that people are proud to pass on to their friends. You make content that is something that is inherently social, so you laugh with your friends, or you share an experience with your friends, or you see a cute animal or a kitten, or you tell your friends about the news. And so I think now we've seen that people are making content for humans instead of Google's algorithm, and it's an exciting time for journalism, and it's an exciting time for entertainment. And really, social has become the new starting point, and Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and Reddit have become the front door for all the content in the world, and smart publishers and advertisers are figuring out how to make content that works for that kind of ecosystem.
Larry, what's the role of traditional content creation and editorial influence in a world where today anybody can create content, and we have people creating Kesha videos or parodies of Gangnam Style, or even the CEOs of large companies writing for Huffington Post? You're managing one of the largest media brands, and how do you view the roles of editors?
Well, increasingly, editors have to be more like hosts. We have to host a conversation. We have to bring the smartest minds together for a discussion and debate. we still do cover news and and provide unbiased content and vetted content in a way that allows people to trust it and to build a relationship with it. So with us as someone who provides them content, whether it's telling them what good shows might be on TV tonight and saving them the time of looking through an infinite number now of television programs, or giving them a take on a new Supreme Court justice or a new bill going through Congress. There is still journalism, and that is still important. And doing it in a way that matters, and doing it in a way that's responsible for its community, and placing a mirror on that community, making sure that your government is behaving for you, and doing all those things, and being responsible that way still is part of the news world and the news content. I think it starts to blur as you get into entertainment and more informational content, and companies providing those kinds, people who aren't media companies providing those that form of content. That's certainly happening in an increasing way, and I don't see why it shouldn't. I mean, what's broken down is the distribution systems, the delivery systems. So why not have those people, do it?
How do you feel these words of editors and curation? I'm not sure, curation's another word.
Curation is very real. I mean, editors were always curators in that if you were the editor of the New York Times 30 years ago and somebody wanted a story in New York that affected the business community, they had to go through you. They would give you press releases, they would call you, they would do whatever it took to try and get you to do the story, because if you didn't do it, it didn't get to where they wanted it to be. It's a different world now. Now everybody's got a platform. Everybody can put their press release out to everybody in the world. And people are looking, readers and viewers are looking to column editors or whatever to help curate that list. If there's 10,000 people who blog on a subject I'm interested in, I have an appreciation for somebody who tells me, here's who's good at it. Here's who gives you some insight. Here's who, we've read them all, and here are the ones you should spend your time with. We still have a finite amount of time. We have an infinite amount of information now, but we have a finite amount of time. That hasn't changed. So curation does matter in real time now, because all the content's being thrown to you in real time. It's very different than it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago.
So, Sarah, you were responsible for taking some of the world's most renowned brands, Vogue and GQ, and really creating their persona and content on the web. Now, you're using content to really bring to life brands that are about commerce and shopping. How do you see the lines between those two blurring?
Well, I guess, and listening to my colleagues here, I agree with you. I don't really like the word content very much. And I think that we all in our business care about what the definition of content is, but that actually the consumer really cares about whether they're getting good stuff or not. Are they getting the article that is really going to tell them the truth about what happened in the debates last night? Are they getting something that really is relevant to them? And I think that one of the big things that the web has done, and all of the sort of tools that have come along with it, like mobile, is help to redefine for the consumer what kinds of stuff they want, what kinds of content they want to consume. So I actually think that one of the things that we're doing at Gilt, and it's being done in other places as well, is using shopping and the brands that you might be interested in for shopping as content. At Gilt City, we actually present experiences in your city that you might be interested in that are curated experiences that go sort of above and beyond what you would get if you weren't on this sort of special insider list. But there are lots of examples. I have a 14-year-old daughter who, when she has half an hour free, goes and creates rooms on PB Teen because she can put together the couch with the bed, with the chair, with the whatever. And she's not thinking about consuming content. She's actually participating in maybe, she can get her hands on my credit card. It's a shopping experience. But really all she wants to do is design the room. And that, to her, is content. And I think all of us in this business are starting to understand that watching the consumer behavior and the things that people really want to engage in is teaching us what content is becoming. It's shopping, it's reading different kinds of curation. The definition has been broadened tremendously.
So what you're saying is if a designer like Michael Kors creates a Pinterest board, in other words, by getting other people to create their own, he in fact is creating content and getting those other people to create content?
Yeah, I mean, we all get very hung up, and rightfully so, with how we're going to monetize all of this activity, right? So
Another word I can't stand is monetize.
It's a terrible word, but everyone knew what I meant. But yes, that's exactly what's happening. That Michael Kors' job is to make things that people want to collect and share with people, because that is how, and it's been ever thus. It used to be just, I wanted the right people wearing my clothes and telling people what they were wearing, and now it has expanded into all of these different areas that allow him to touch consumers he might not have touched before, but it's also a lot of responsibility because you have to figure out how to do it well.
So Fran, let's start expanding this word content. Let's talk about it in terms of great photos and journalism and articles. You're creating all of those in a way that travels across different formats. How do these get more valuable, and how are you changing them as they travel across different platforms?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's something that we talk about a lot at Time Inc. This notion of content having 9 lives, and I think that's really become so much more relevant with the advent of consumer apps. So if we just take an example of recipes, which is something I know, Sarah, is near and dear to your heart. If we look at recipes and we take one of our food magazines like Cooking Light, so we may have a recipe that we publish in Cooking Light magazine, which is a paid product. We then take that same recipe and we publish it on myrecipes.com, which is a free website, right? It's an aggregator of all 60,000 recipes across all of our brands. We then take that same recipe and we publish it in a Cooking Light app, which is a paid app. So basically we went from paid to free to paid again. And I think with iTunes and now with Google Play, you have consumers that are really willing to pay for digital content. And they're willing to pay for convenience, and they're willing to pay for a faster, easier experience via an app as opposed to the browser. So I think it's really interesting. That whole kind of pay to free to paid cycle is something that we're seeing more and more of.
John, can brands become media companies themselves? Do they in fact become creators?
I'm not sure becoming a media company is the end state, but I think ultimately brands can become content creators. Brands already have become content creators. More specifically, a lot of our clients, a lot of brands approach us and they say, well, we want branded content. We want to create branded content. And we come back to them and say, well, let's think about yourself as a content brand. What do you stand for? What is it that you do that can be relevant to a specific set of customers that they might be interested in? That intersection between customer interest and the relevance of the product and service you provide basically gives a brand, a marketer, a company an opportunity to become a publisher. They already do it. Advertorial has been around much longer than the internet, so I don't think it's a new concept. I just think it's one that has been accelerated by the advantages that digital media provide.
Yeah, there's no reason why if I'm going out to buy a television set, why the expert that Best Buy might have me read on the online and on BestBuy.com or on BestBuy.com or whatever it's called is any different than the one I might have read on CNET before. If they're selling TVs, but they're selling all of them, and and the readers who comment on all of those sites are very similar, and you're used to walking into a store and asking a salesman, what TV should I buy? So creating that kind of content makes perfect sense. You're starting to see, I think one of the confusing things is the mix of all of these platforms coming together. So for the traditional journalistic element, it's not as traditional as it used to be. Journalism.
So the line is blurrier?
Yeah, well, the journalism line is blurrier because it used to be that newsrooms were built around a medium, a TV newsroom, a newspaper newsroom, a web newsroom, and now those lines are blurring. So newsrooms are really built around what they're covering. MarketWatch covered business, and it put content out on the web, on television, on radio, on all those formats. And now it's getting even blurrier. So we're USA Today's a newspaper. We have 60 million people on varying websites every month. And we have, and on mobile, including our mobile apps and all that stuff. And now we're starting to cover stories for the length of the story arc, not for our publication schedule. So if the story is the Oscars, you know, we might put out, on the first day that the Oscar nominees are announced, we might put out an app with that Oscar information in it, and with all the some footage from all the films and all that stuff. And then have e-commerce as part of that app, where you can go and click on it and go see that movie near where you live. And then have, and build it up and keep adding content from all our different publications, even our local papers and stuff, throughout the period of time that the Oscars are of interest. And at the end, when it's Oscar night, have a fantasy game on there where everybody in your party can go in and play a game. And we've become...
So these are escalating levels of content through multiple
and it's
formats.
It's not traditional journalism, but we're in a relationship with the user. We're trying to, look at how our viewers and users want to use content, and we're helping them do it.
So if I ask the rest of the panel, does it matter where you find content and on what platform? I mean, so Jonah talked earlier about they used to be optimized for search. And today, a lot of people aren't coming into the front door. They're not coming in through the homepage of a website. They're coming in through the side door. Does it matter where this content exists and on what platforms?
It's changing.
I mean, I think that's the main thing that matters. I think the reason it's hard to talk about content is because medium is what defines content. And so, if you're in Hollywood and you're talking about TV and movies, you don't say, what is content? You just make movies, you make TV shows, and it's easy. The web is characterized by constant innovation, constant shifting, the emergence of new platforms in the span of a couple of years that all of a sudden are reaching, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people. And so the people who have the most success on the web are people who embrace that constant change, where the medium is never clear. You're not, it's not a television program and a movie. It's something different that's always changing. And so embracing and experimenting with new platforms is really a steady state where you're constantly having to
watch what happens when they come together. I mean, watch what happens when the internet is a delivery system into your television set, which it's becoming, right? Most TVs are being produced with internet connectivity now. So what happens in 2 or 3 years when, My Damn Channel is producing a show for your consumption at 8 o'clock at night in your easy chair in front of your 60-inch TV?
So independent of the platform, but...
It's the consumer use of the platform that matters. So the consumers watch television a certain way. They like to sit down and watch TV in their living room at night, let's say. But there's nothing to say that in a couple of years it's not the internet that may not be delivering that TV to you, and that will change how the business model of the internet plays out.
But don't you think a lot of that is, I mean, I watch my kids. I think a lot of that is, it's prettier on the TV. My kids are watching news on YouTube from people you've never heard of.
Yeah.
And they're doing it on their laptops because that's what they have, and they've been trying to figure out how to make it work with our Apple TV, which they'll get there before I do. But I don't think that's actually a fundamental change in that same way, and I actually don't think
No, it's not a change in their habits. Their habits stay the same, and if they can get it on the TV and it's prettier, that's where they want it. They want entertainment to be on TV. I want to watch a basketball game on a 60-inch screen. Now, if I'm on a train from New York to Washington and the game I want is on then, I'll watch it on my phone or on my iPad.
Or on my iPad.
But all I'm saying is that as the distribution portion of the web business, which is part of the business, starts to integrate all the different ways of watching programs, we're going to see a confusion here. You're going to see it's suddenly a different way to deliver, NCIS to you. And it doesn't matter, and in the end, the consumer doesn't care. That your kid's going to sit in front of that TV with a remote that can call up funnyordie.com as fast as they can call up Channel 2, and that's the game changer.
John, do your clients care about the platform? Are they coming to you and saying we need to be in certain places?
They care about the platform from the perspective of there are certain places where content can be more successful. Excuse me. Some of our clients have very large installed bases of Facebook fans. You're talking about 3 to 10 million people who are willing to engage with you on a very regular basis. And content that we design for that audience is very, very different than content that we will seed within Twitter, per se. We find on Procter and a variety of other clients that people who love you are looking for a different level of engagement and are willing to put up with more brand in the content than, say, again, seeding something on Twitter where you have a piece of content that might just be more pure enjoyment with a little bit more subtle brand play to it. So they do care from that perspective, but they also look at it and say, if it gets pushed around and shows up in a million different networks, great for us. They're not necessarily beholden to one particular property over another.
I think the other part of this, which we haven't talked about, is the sort of financial model ramifications of search and social. So, search and social are a great way to attract new users to your brands, but they're not as lucrative as the people that come to your homepage, right? So like if you're coming in through search or you're coming in through social, you might read one or two articles on the site.
Is that because it's like a hit and run traffic?
It's a hit and run kind of thing. Whereas if you're coming in through the homepage, which 50% of our traffic still comes in through the homepage, those people are spending a lot of time on the site. They're viewing 15 to 20 page views. So I think that dynamic is also
Isn't it also because your homepage is content? I mean,
yes.
one of the things, it goes back to the question about curation. One of the things we do as media companies is we curate, we bring things to the front and we say, this is important, this is cool. MarketWatch had more than half of its views were front page views. I'm not sure those people, a lot of them ever read any story from beginning to end, but they wanted to know what was important and where it fit into the day, and that was content for them.
So, but this brings us to the issue of, in the past, a lot of content, whether it was journalism or it was television shows, derived its value from, and in some ways the credibility, from the media brands it was attached to. Do those brands mean anything in a world where I can access content anywhere?
I think they do, but it depends on the advantage that the content brings to the network and the advantage that the network brings to the content. So if it's a large enough play to reach a broad enough audience, then I think that relationship is still very valid today. The old PBS model of, oil company A promoting, special B, definitely worked then, and there's probably still opportunities for it to work now. However, I think what's shifting the conversation a bit is a lot of our clients are looking to reach far more targeted audiences. So those larger media relationships might provide larger scale. However, they're not as targeted. They can't go after a specific audience more easily. And when they look at the digital ecosystem and they say, we want to reach these 1 million people specifically, they find other avenues for doing that.
Jonah, how are you thinking about the value of content
I think
with your
brands
brand?
still matter a lot. We take great care in the content we produce, even the pure entertainment, fun, social content, and in the journalism that we do. And partly that's because when you go to Twitter or Facebook and you see a BuzzFeed story in your news feed or in your stream, we want people to get excited and say, I'm more likely to click it because it's a BuzzFeed story than less likely, and I'm excited, and I know it's going to be something that's going to be interesting to share and that will be in the mix. So in that sense, I think brands still matter. I would only add that there is starting to be more brands than just the publisher's brand. So, Ben Smith is a brand, and, he has over 100,000 people following him on Twitter, and Michael Hastings is a brand, Dori Shafir is a brand. We have people who have followings on Twitter and Facebook who have their own trust and their own followers, and that becomes something where the brand of the publisher and the brand of the actual stars who work there, who are active on social media, start to have to work together and start to overlap.
And that's a big issue, obviously, for media companies. And what we have to learn is how to embrace that. We can't hide it. We can't sit there and ignore it and just try to make every one of our contributors subservient to the overarching brand.
So are you trying to make your contributors into brands themselves?
Yes. I mean, I think we have to accept that, and we have to provide value to them to work with our brand. So, we know that means they can leave. Look, Politico was started by two political writers whose brands had become bigger than the Washington Post where they worked. it wasn't about the Washington Post, they had become just as important. And they were able to go and do that. And that was partly because the Post didn't give them the opportunity to grow their own brands any bigger or to make more money or to do whatever it meant to do that. And I think, and tried to fight that trend. And I think that's something we can't fight. So, having our writers tweet under their own names and supporting them, but giving them multiple platforms and giving them a bigger range and supporting them is the way we hope we'll keep them. It doesn't mean that, and they become, we become more like a symphony orchestra with a lot of different instruments playing and not a single, note anymore by one instrument.
So, Sarah, talking about personalities, you could put Gilt City together with Groupon and Fab. All of them created personality around their own company. How are you thinking about the voice and the type of content that you're creating?
We have a brand. Gilt, the company, has been around for just 5 years, but really does have a brand. And actually, Fab has been around for a very short period of time and also has a brand, just to use that as another example. We have got to be really diligent every single day to make sure that the curation that we're doing around the offers that we have, whether it's on Gilt City or on Gilt proper, which is the retail side, really are on brand. And it's interesting because the level of engagement on these sites is very, very high. And we are actually now, and have been for a while, I haven't been there that long, but this has been going on for almost 2 years, putting together programs for partners that are much more like marketing than they are retail. So we've done a bunch of what are called internally wow sales with car companies, where you sell a car, sometimes it's at full price and sometimes it's at a diminished price. And we did one with Range Rover, we did one with 3 Jettas, we did one recently with Fiat. And the press around it and the outreach to our consumers around it and sort of the excitement and promotion that we've built around it with events and things like that, that are both at the city level and also at the national level on the Gilt platform, have created tens of millions of impressions for some of these car companies. And the cars that they're selling, in the case of Infiniti, there was one just this spring. It was gone in, I kid you not, 5 seconds. But there were 10,000 people on the wait list. So someone bought it at full price on the site, wanted to have it first. It was the only white one, which is, I guess, very exciting. But the thing that was very cool for Infiniti was they ended up with this enormous lead list. And that site, the reason I even bring those up is that those sort of moments of excitement and promotion and sort of big things happening there make it more than just a site where you can get cashmere sweaters for less or a designer item for less or a restaurant for less. And we actually spend an extraordinary amount of time trying to make sure that the mix, and we really think of it more like programming, that the mix of offers that go out really support that brand. And by the way, if you're a Gilt customer, you could hear from us 8 times a week by choice. It could be once a week, it could be 3 times a week, it could be 8 times a week. So extraordinary sort of touch points with that consumer that the brands are now riding along with us, not all of them in retail relationships.
When you look at the people who are today content creators, they are having a lot of trouble grappling with the idea that people and audiences are not necessarily consumers but users. Just for the entire panel, I'd love to hear everybody's point of view about to what extent does content need to be created by users for it to be credible?
Well, stories, when we published a story in a newspaper, that was the end of the process. That's actually the beginning of the process now. So they have to, they contribute to the story. They help shape the story as it goes forward, because it's much more of a relationship than a one-way street, the way it used to be, I think, in all content areas, whether you're on television or in print or certainly on digital. The reaction continues, and in some ways it's a higher standard journalistically, because you're held to a standard that believes that whatever you have up on your site is something that you believe to be accurate and true to the best of your knowledge, and yet things are changing every minute, and can you react that quickly? So it makes it much harder. There's a lot of confusion, because we used to, in the media world, react around deadlines and build our expertise to certain deadlines, and you knew how much time to spend to make something good. And that's blurry now, because you can always spend more time on something versus getting it out faster, and you can never really know what was the right answer. Is the right answer to get the subject out quickly while it's on people's minds, or is it to do a better job when fewer people might read it, but it'll be better?
It's speed versus perfection.
Yeah, speed. You know, it's a never-ending cycle now. It's a constant 24/7 cycle, and we're only feeling. Most media people I know are only feeling their way through it now, and trying to figure it out. And the devices help, because actually, if you track devices, you see there are patterns as to when people use devices. Not perfect, obviously, but you still see television viewing at night. You still see, to a great extent, you see computers and phones being used during the day when people are at work or moving around. You see print, to some extent, still being a morning thing. And so you can program a little bit around that, but it's not perfect, and it's changing every day.
But there are, go ahead, John.
So I was just to add to that, I think the sort of first generation of online publishers used the web, thought of the web as being this new distribution technology where you didn't have to own timber interests and pulp paper mills and trucks to pass, to distribute your newspaper. You could go directly to the consumer for cheaper, and you could update instantaneously, and that was seen as the sort of benefit and sort of first wave of web publishing. Then I think the second wave, you started to see people realizing that data could tell you what your readers are doing. You could look at what headlines they're clicking and which stories they're interacting with. Are they commenting? Are they contributing? And that became, for us at Huffington Post, that was a big advantage. We didn't just use the web to distribute content more easily and update it more quickly. We used it to know what our readers were doing and have a better sense of that. And now I think you see a sort of third wave of social where users are thinking of themselves not as consumers of content. So BuzzFeed's front page, people don't just go there for themselves. They go there to look for something to share with a friend. I mean, it was kind of an aha moment a couple years ago where I got an email saying there wasn't anything I could share, good for me to share on BuzzFeed. And I was like, oh, I used to think of front pages of sites being for the reader. Now the front page of the site is a discovery mechanism for people to be the publisher themselves and to share stuff and pass stuff on. So I really see that as kind of a third wave where you have the digital advantages of digital distribution, you have the real-time data feedback, and then you also have the reader as a publisher and as someone who is sharing and engaging.
Yeah, we're all
so I'm getting the sign that we have a couple minutes left. I want to make sure that we can answer one or two questions, and then I've got one last question for our panel.
Okay, we have one that came in by text message from the audience, and this is not from me, it's from somebody else. How did Larry Kramer like the Colbert Report episode on the redesign of USA Today?
I adored it. It was great. I don't know if you saw it, but he did he said basically made fun of us and said, obviously they were in this big renovation they were doing. They'd concentrated on what was important, the logo, and he showed our new, which was of course a blue ball, and he pulled it up and said, "Here it is." And it shows this ball, and he basically said, everybody, he said, if you're a basketball, or if you're a pizza or a bagel or a pizza bagel, you're going to be covered in the USA Today. But if you're SpongeBob SquarePants or a Dorito or the Pentagon, not so much. And so my art staff, without me asking, I love this. Our art staff did a ball treatment. We call it a treatment. It's a living logo. We program it every night. Did a treatment of SpongeBob holding a Dorito in the Pentagon in the ball, and we published it the next day. But he also, and we went back and forth. He had a great one where his staff did one of the balls showing our art staff holding a gun to its head and shooting itself for having to do this every day. But for us, for a newspaper in America to have Colbert spend 10 minutes on us with an audience that we're trying to attract to what we're doing and digitally and online, it was fantastic. It was as good as we could get.
Hi. Well, that's a tough answer to follow. I know how you guys started out saying how much you dislike the word content. So I want you to tell me what you think of the word native content, or the term native content, and specifically this notion that the new advertising is basically designed to look like the existing or old editorial content. And it's one thing if you're working for a brand and it's fully disclosed in the case of your clients. on BuzzFeed, your sponsored content flows through in the same news feeds that all of your organic content flows through. So I just want to get a little reaction from the panel on that.
We're big fans of native advertising and content-based marketing. We think that banners have had a bad effect on publishing, where people do things like slideshows and split their articles into multiple pages and do things to juice impressions of banners, or things that expand and cover what you're trying to read, and that those things are really because the advertising model is broken, and you have to do more and more to keep optimizing to try to get more clicks out of something that's not working. And so our approach is to have a creative services team. We have church-state separation. The creative services team works with brands to make great content, and then that content lives in the stream in a unit that says partner or advertiser, that is the Google yellow color, so that it's fully disclosed. When you click through to their page, it's published by the brand, so it's clear that the brand is publishing it. So, you know, it's Virgin Mobile, it's GE, it's Microsoft, it's Toyota. And then the goal for the advertiser is to make things that are compelling enough that people will want to read it and want to share it and pass it around. And every big brand has an interesting story to tell if they take content creation seriously.
Let me rephrase my question, I'm sorry, because actually what you're doing now is very well delineated. Let me ask you all, are you concerned about the future of delineating the difference between native advertising content and organic editorial content?
I understand totally what you're worried about, and it is an issue, especially when you're dealing with non-traditional media companies who are mixing both. But I think the key church and state difference he talked about is still critical. What's you have to understand is that advertising, and I consider advertising a form of content too, you just have to know what it is. Advertisers have exactly the same issues that media companies do. They're trying to learn how to tell their stories on these new platforms. And so we work with them on how to do it, and not surprisingly, we're learning the same techniques, the same tools, and it's going to look more and more like each other. So the goal of a media organization is to make sure, you know, you're not deceptive. And if you're maintaining any kind of impartiality, if that's important to your reader, then you have to maintain it. And you have to say this is, you know, sponsored links are not a problem. If they say sponsored links, that's very clearly telling you exactly what they're doing. And you know, the ad that used to appear in the newspaper that looked a lot like it was in the newspaper, if it didn't have advertisement over it, that was as much a problem. But in a new medium where people aren't used to the barriers, you have to go out of your way to make sure there are differences, and there is something to signal them. But it's not, I mean, it's an age-old issue. If anybody who tries to make something look like something else is doing it because it's in their interest, not in the interest of the reader.
It probably fits better in some kinds of sites than others, or some kinds of context than others. At Condé Nast, we were doing it years ago with Style.com because it was fashion content and fashion advertising, and fashion advertising traditionally has been part of whatever property it was that you were going to for fashion content. So I worked at Vogue magazine. The ads were as exciting to the consumer as the editorial was. And you can make beautiful things from advertisers that are really native advertising. The trick is, first of all, you can't shove call it native advertising and shove something in where it doesn't belong. As Larry says, you can't be deceptive. The other thing that's hard is it's very hard to scale that. You know, to your point, Jonah, that you end up doing custom stuff with your creative services people. And I would say that the 17 almost years that I've been in digital, a lot of time has been spent on trying to help our advertisers understand what to do with the consumers that we understand possibly better than they do, at least at the moment of consumption of our media product. And it's hard because people get impatient and they want it to go faster, or they want to place it even where it's not perfect, and you end up with bad mistakes.
So we have time for
one more question, which is along the same line. And the question from the audience is, does church and state exist anymore? Is there a line you cross now that you wouldn't cross 10 years ago?
They absolutely exist, and most of the lines are pretty much the same. I think there's more opportunity to be deceptive Because in the old days, if you wanted to look like the New York Times, you had to get a press, you had to print it, you had to do lots of things. If you want to look like the New York Times online, and God knows why you'd want to do that, the way they look, but you can make yourself look like that very easily without any cost. So there is more opportunity to confuse. I don't think it happens all that much. I mean, I think the brand issue is that's why brands are important. If you know who a brand is, you have a certain amount of trust in it, and it means something to you, and that shortcuts that problem. But Google did their thing with sponsored links, and we're doing it on certain listings where we'll let you sponsor links as long as they're labeled. I think it's a service. I think it's a reader service.
And real quick, if I may, sorry, I think that the best branded content produced by brands marketers is content where their presence overtly actually benefits the piece of content itself. It's better to have that brand, that company saying, I am speaking from a
It's like
point
Best
of
Buy
authority.
saying, here's a good TV.
Consumers don't like to be tricked. They're smart enough. They see through all of this stuff in the first place. So I just think that if more brands were willing to just be more overt about their presence and the sponsorship of the
But
content
it did
itself.
take a little time, and the opportunity was there. If you remember in the 90s, there was this rash of when Yahoo started publishing in the financial area, started publishing press releases mixed in with news, and that some people took advantage of that, wrote press releases with a headline that would get a stock to move, and then they had to, then people got burned because the stock went up, and then they realized the story was bogus or it was distorted, and they lost money. But it's a caveat emptor, each new time you have something.
So with that, I'm told that they're getting the hook, but I want to thank each of our panelists today, and we could have had this discussion, could have gone on for hours. But thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And the panelists will stay up here on the side for a couple minutes if anyone has